morning and welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and thanks for being here for our briefing on Venezuela and associated issues. This morning of introducing Peter DeShazo, who is our Americas Program Director and is the former, among other things in government, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Peter's got a lot to say this morning, and we'll be able to answer some questions, so we'll get right to it. Peter.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Venezuelan election and U.S. relations with Venezuela, and then open the floor to any questions you may have. As a bit of background, Hugo Chavez has been in power in Venezuela for 8 years. He was elected president in 1998. Was re-elected to a 6-year term under the terms of the new constitution in 2000. He won a recall referendum in August of 2004 and is now running for a second 6-year term. The opposition candidate is the governor of Zulia state, which is one of the 2 states in the hands of the opposition, Manuel Rosales. The opposition finally united around a single candidate. The polls for the election are sort of all over the map, but they show Chavez with a lead that varies from anywhere from about 25 points to maybe 6 points. There's much questioning of the methodology of the polls, the accuracy. Opposition has highlighted what they call the fear factor, that people are simply not willing to state what their preference is, and that will have some influence on the polling. Although by just about any measurement, Chavez is the favorite. Relatively reasonably high voter turnout is expected. In the past, there have been high rates of abstention, especially in the previous legislative election, which the opposition had boycotted. Chavez predicts that he will win big. He says that his goal is 10 million votes. In fact, he needs to win big. A relatively small margin of victory would not be convincing because he claims that the opposition amounts to little and that he's the overwhelming favorite of the voters. The final rallies of Chavez and Rosales have in Caracas and in the final rallies in the past couple of days in other cities have shown a high turnout for Rosales. His last rally in Caracas I think it was on Sunday was quite impressive in terms of the numbers, but we'll see how the vote turns out. The election is taking place in a climate of polarization, which is not new in Venezuela. Chavez has been very dismissive of the opposition, calling them lackeys of the United States, counter-revolutionaries, basically ridiculing the candidacy of Rosales. Rosales has concentrated on what he considers the social and economic failures of the Chavez regime and making his own promises as well. He's portrayed Chavez as a sellout to Castro and an authoritarian dictator in the making. In his rally in Maracaibo yesterday, he said basically the Venezuelans have a stark choice between democracy and Cuban style government. Although Rosales says that he has no problems with Cuba, just with the nature of the Cuban regime. So the atmosphere is pretty contentious. In the opposition, there's considerable distrust of the system. In the past, the opposition accused the government of fraud, especially in the use of electoral voting machines in the August 2004 plebiscite. although this was a view not endorsed by the international observers who were present at the time. There's been more time to review the procedures, the voting lists, and a long discussion of the fingerprinting ID process that is being used in a modified fashion. The Supreme Electoral Council that runs the election is heavily dominated by Chavistas. In the climate leading up to the election, I think was marked by the use by Chavez, very all-out use of government resources to promote his candidacy, including strong pressure on public employees to attend rallies and to vote in favor of Chavez. There was a video that had been circulated of the president of the state oil company, PDVSA, and who was also the minister of hydrocarbons, telling a very large group of PDVSA workers that it is all good PDVSA workers vote for Chavez. There'll be some 200 international observers present for the election. They just arrived this week from the Carter Center, from the OAS, from the European Union. Chavez has portrayed this election as a watershed, the end of an intermediary process of his revolution, with fuller implementation of his revolution to follow. He said that he intends to call a referendum in 2010 to amend the Constitution to allow for indefinite re-election. In earlier statements, he said that he plans to, quote, retire in 2021, indicating that he intends to stay in power considerably longer. The U.S. relationship with Venezuela remains a difficult one, but the bottom line of the relationship is still energy. Venezuela is the fourth most important source of imported oil into the United States, about 1.2 million barrels of crude a day and maybe 1.5 of crude and product, which is more than half of Venezuela's total production. That relationship is mutually beneficial and unlikely to change despite the nature of the bilateral relationship. Perhaps I can stop there and answer questions that you might have.
Great. If you could give your name and your news organization, that would be very helpful in answering questions.
Mahmoud Hamalawi with Al Jazeera in Washington. You said President Chavez is most likely going to win the election. What implications does that mean for the U.S., or what should the U.S. look for from him?
Okay, well, what I'm saying is the polls show that he has most polls indicate that he is in the lead. I'm not predicting the outcome of the election, but certainly the advantage appears to be his. Should he win, I think the United States can expect a relationship that's been quite the same as the one that we currently have. I don't see any indication that Chavez intends to view the United States in any sort of a different way, or change his rhetoric or his policies. I think it remains to be seen how that relationship will continue to evolve. But right now I don't see anything in the cards that points to any major change.
David.
David Lynch, USA Today. Could you talk a little bit about Chavez's efforts to expand relations with China? What are the real possibilities for that, and what limits in terms of devoting relations that might otherwise go to the West instead of to China?
Chavez has made much of the importance of the relationship with China and with other countries, sort of non-traditional investors or trade partners with Venezuela, and said the goal is to augment the shipments of crude to China, which right now are at a small level, and there's some Chinese investment in Venezuela. In terms of a change in the overall energy relationship with the United States, I don't see that as very likely. Venezuela, traditionally Venezuela has shipped the bulk of its production to the United States. There are many advantages in doing so. It's a short route to the markets. The refineries are in place to refine the heavy-grade Venezuelan crude. Distribution system is in place. It's a historically close relationship and one that's unlikely to change.
Rachel.
Well, there have been, I think the experience has shown that when Chavez is seen to be closely involved in supporting a candidate, it can backfire. It was certainly the case in Peru, where his support for Ollanta Humala was detrimental to Ollanta's candidacy. And his rhetoric at the United Nations and the fact that Venezuela was not able to win, to succeed in its bid for a UN Security Council seat was a big setback for him. And I think again his performance at the UN was something that was not attractive to leaders around the region. In the case of Nicaragua, Ortega won because the Liberal Party vote split. It really had nothing to do with Chavez. In Ecuador, the winning candidate said that he's a friend of Chavez and he intends to work closely with Venezuela, but he as well said, I'm not controlled by Chavez, and he tried to distance himself to a degree from Chavez. So there's a counterproductive element that a lot of candidates in the region have seen of being seen to be too close to Chavez.
Did you speak into the microphone? I'm sorry. Just click it on the bottom.
It's Bruno Garces from BBC Brazil. I think for quite a while the U.S. regarded Brazil and President Lula as a somewhat counterpoint to Chavez's more tougher stance against the U.S. How does it see its role now? How does it see Brazil now? Is it still the U.S. Do the U.S. still regard Brazil as, could it do more to somewhat isolate Chavez, or it will most likely keep its current stance?
I don't think it's a question of isolating Chavez. I don't think that's not what the United States is trying to do. The United States policy is based on an agenda of promoting democracy, stability, development in the region. Clearly, Brazil is a key player, a key regional power, and it's a country that has close ties with Venezuela and close interests in Venezuela. So what Brazil thinks about Venezuela is important. In the past, the United States has worked with Venezuela. For example, the Friends of the Secretary General of the OAS on Venezuela to try to seek a constitutional and a democratic means of working through the confrontation that was taking place in Venezuela after the short departure from power of Chavez in 2002. So I think the United States and will probably continue a close dialogue with Brazil on Venezuela, as it will on other regional issues that are important to both countries.
Insofar as you can summarize this, why do people support Chavez support him? What are the things about him that they like?
shows that his support resides in the social classes D and E of Brazilian society, the poorest, basically. I'm sorry, Brazilian, Venezuelan. That his support is strongly among the poorest, the least advantaged elements of Venezuela. This in part because of very large-scale spending that Chavez has done in past years on different social programs that have been popular in those sectors that have put money in people's pockets. They haven't. I think it could be much questioned as to what they've done in terms of creating longer-term prospects for sustained economic growth, for job creation. But certainly in the short term, it's pumped a lot of money into the economy of the barrios, of the poorer neighborhoods in Caracas, and he's popular in those sectors.
Peter, is one question I'd like to put on the table is why does the United States continue to seem to have this very public struggle with Chavez? Given the fact that Venezuela is the fourth largest oil importer of the United States, we're in a position where we are doing business with them. Where has the diplomacy failed, if in your opinion it has failed?
Venezuela and the United States have historically had a very close relationship. Venezuela has been one of the countries historically in the region that has had closest ties to the United States. Very strong, very friendly ties on a government-to-government and also on a people-to-people basis. And the deterioration of the bilateral relationship has really evolved over a period of time. It's speeded up or slowed down, and there have been moments in which it looked like things were heading back in a better direction. I think the United States at the very beginning took a sort of a wait-and-see attitude towards Chavez, open-mindedness, willingness to engage. The growing anti-U.S. rhetoric of Chavez has played a big role in that. His ultra-nationalistic policies, which I think hurt cooperation in a lot of different areas that had been traditional. So the relationship sort of deteriorated over time. The war of words that people often talk about between the United States and Venezuela is really more of a one-sided exchange, with most of the rhetoric coming out of Chavez and relatively quiet responses from the part of the United States. Chavez is not interested in having the kind of relationship with the United States that was the traditional one between the U.S. and Venezuela.
Is there any hope for the United States to mend this relationship? Obviously, the public perception of it revolves around, particularly around highlight events like the UN. Is there a situation now where, following on the heels of this election, the United States can be in a position to sort of mend this public perception?
I think the United States is open to working with Venezuela on areas that are of mutual interest. If the interest comes from the side of the Venezuelans and there's a desire to work together, there are possibilities for that. But that's not the rhetoric that's coming out of Caracas. So we just have to wait and see.
Adriana Garcia from Reuters. Sorry. Do you see any changes in this relation with Democrats in Congress?
I don't see any major difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in their outlook towards Venezuela. There may be individuals who are more, who may have somewhat different points of view, but generally I don't see a great difference between the two sides.
Elise.
say in general the policy has been to a relatively modest response to the rhetoric that's come out of Venezuela, and a more of a quiet diplomacy. I think that's been the general approach of the United States. I think there's an openness to engagement. If you listen to the pronouncements that have been made by Ambassador Brownfield in Caracas, he said, "I'm here. I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to seek avenues of positive engagement if those avenues are made available."
Sure. Can you talk into the microphone at least just so we can get it on the transcript? Click in there.
I get what you're saying in the sense that the response has been modest in terms of the rhetoric, but I'm kind of wondering if you feel that the administration started it, and then when Chavez responded in a sense, then the administration took this kind of higher road approach.
I think again that the relationship deteriorated over time, and the desire of the United States from the beginning was to seek ways of cooperation with the government, and step-by-step basis, this was made more difficult from the part of view of Venezuela. Right now, the relationship is not a good one, and it's increasingly harder to find middle ground on different issues. We just have to wait and see how it continues to evolve, but don't see any change right now.
Why is it, if I may just jump in, I think I'm going to click that one off. If I can just jump in, why is it important for the United States to mend this relationship? Why, or is it not? I mean, what's the result of letting this relationship fester the way it is now? What kind of effect would that have on our our hemispheric interactions?
I think the relations between the United States and the hemisphere in general it varies from country to country. Is generally good, but it could be a lot better. And I don't think that necessarily Venezuela is a major factor in the end in the relationship the U.S. will have with other countries in the region. What the United States needs to do is to concentrate on its own image in the region, its own policies, its own bilateral relations, its own trade relationships, its multilateral relationships. If Venezuela takes a course towards a strengthened democracy and cooperation with other countries in the region, that's great. If it wants to cooperate with the United States and work with the United States, that's good. If it takes another course, well, then the United States will have to adjust its policies accordingly. But right now, there are many other countries in the region that the United States is engaged actively with on trade and other key issues, and just going to have to concentrate on a strengthened relationship with the hemisphere in general.
David?
Could you talk a little bit about what you expect going forward in the region? Ecuador is just the latest example of several recent years of countries explicitly turned their back on the economic policies of the U.S. and the other countries like Malawi. Does the example of Argentina, which has been gangbusters since they were just that, encourage other countries to follow suit? Are these countries that have gone that English
I think it varies from country to country. In general, the idea that there's sort of a lurch to the left in Latin America, I don't necessarily agree with. I think that there are basically sort of two camps in the region. There's the countries that are committed to representative democracy and to generally orthodox economic policies, and there can be differences between them. and the model of what I would call authoritarian populism that envisages a very much larger state sector and a far greater state role in the economy. And I think Venezuela is the leading example in that regard. And if you look at the elections that have taken place in the region, most of the winners, whether they're sort of labor leftists like Lula, or they're social democrats like Michelle Bachelet, or they're conservatives like Uribe, they're members of the first group. In other countries, Bolivia is sort of still a work in progress. Clearly, Evo Morales is friendly with Chavez and has expressed a lot of admiration for Castro. There are close links between Bolivia and Venezuela, but Bolivia is still, in the process of sort of finding its way, and the United States has been, I think, engaged with the Evo Morales government to try to seek ways of cooperation and looking for moderate policies. So it's sort of still early to call. Ecuador, you mentioned, clearly the platform of Correa has been very much in tune with a model more like the populist statist model of Chavez, if you want to call it a model. But again, he hasn't taken office yet, and so it'll be interesting to see if he moderates any of those policies. He walked back somewhat from his first round rhetoric in the second round because he felt like it wasn't getting the kind of resonance that he had hoped. And in the case of Nicaragua, as I said before, the victory had little to do with Chavez and had everything to do with the split in the Liberal Party vote. And the United States has said that it intends to engage with Nicaragua and to seek ways in which we can continue to have a useful relationship. And those are the signals coming out of Nicaragua as well.
What about the example of Argentina?
Argentina is a country that came out of a very difficult crisis, perhaps the worst crisis, financial crisis, and social crisis in recent memory in that country, and is one that is looking for ways to continue the process forward of high rates of growth, of trying to pull people out of poverty. With the relationship with the IMF there's criticism in Argentina of the banks and everything else, but at the same time they're pursuing largely orthodox economic policies. There's no major movement back from free market oriented kinds of policies. There are price controls and there are other populist measures, but in general Argentina is pursuing a liberal economic model.
Questions?
For Cuba and Venezuela, its name was announced this week, Norman Bailey. How do you think this role would accommodate into the U.S. policy towards Venezuela?
I'm not sure exactly what his role will be. The fact that Cuba and Venezuela are considered together, I think, indicates the fact that Chavez has reached out to embrace the Cuban regime to a degree that no other government in the hemisphere has, and that the close cooperation between Cuba and Venezuela is rather unprecedented in the hemisphere.
Elise.
Well, why do you think that is? I mean, do you think that Chavez, a lot of administration officials feel that Chavez, by cozying up to Castro, when Castro eventually dies, that he's going to take the role as kind of the uber anti-American revolutionary in the region. And I was just wondering if you think that if Chavez wins as pretty much expected, I guess, in this election, how you think that would impact the relations with the United States. I'm sorry I was a little bit late if you went into this, but do you think that while the rhetoric will obviously continue, I mean, certainly the cooperation that the United States is kind of hoping will eventually come, do you think that will take an even further downturn, and do you see a real kind of coming to loggerheads and much more of a standoff than we have now?
Okay, on Cuba, Chavez and Castro had or have, I don't know, whatever the situation is right now, but a very close personal relationship in which Fidel Castro was a mentor of Chavez, and Chavez, with his Bolivarian revolution and his enormous resources, has sort of rekindled a revolutionary zeal, or a zeal to reach out in the region. And you see Chavez repeating a lot of the sort of the old interests of Fidel Castro in promoting a revolutionary ideal in the region, of promoting issues like independence of Puerto Rico, in which this has been a favorite of Castro's for a long time, and Chavez has even jumped on that bandwagon. With Castro, when Castro is out of the picture, I think it'll be a new situation for Chavez, whether he assumes the sort of regional revolutionary mantle. I think that he probably figures that he will. What kind of a relationship he would have with, one would expect, Raul Castro and power to be is something that's a good question to ask. But there had been a sort of a symbiotic relationship between Fidel Castro and Chavez up until now. In terms of what the United States can expect from Chavez should he win the election and be president of Venezuela for another 6 years, my sense is that there's unlikely to be any major change in the relationship. I don't see anything or hear anything coming out of Caracas that indicates a desire to extend an olive branch or to make many changes in the way that relationship is. Perhaps there could be some positive movement in certain areas of possible cooperation, but I think it will remain a difficult relationship.
But on the opposite of that, do you think that, given the new mandate, that this will further embolden him on his kind of anti-American views?
I think the rhetoric against the United States is unlikely to change. What the real question is, how is all that going to be translated into actual policy initiatives? What further steps? What will Chavez do? And what sort of support is he going to have? He needs money to carry out his foreign policy. He's highly committed in terms of investments in oil subsidies outside of Venezuela. He looks to use oil diplomacy and other means to carry out his foreign policy, and so a lot of that will depend on the income that he's getting from the oil sector, and that to what extent the price of oil and the production in Venezuela will have a major impact on his ability to carry out his policies.
Marvin.
At one time, there were major U.S.-owned oil facilities, refineries, and so forth in Venezuela. I presume that's all gone. I just wondered whether they nationalized, how did that happen? Was Chavez involved?
Venezuela nationalized its oil industry in 1975. That was during Acción Democrática government. In the 1990s, Venezuela allowed investment back in to the oil sector. There was the so-called opening, and there was considerable investment in oil production and gas in Venezuela, exploration, new production. The Venezuelan government allowed foreign companies, U.S., European, others, to come in and invested in some of the residual fields and also in the extra heavy crude production in the Orinoco Belt. So those companies are, many of them are still operating in Venezuela, but Chavez has put the squeeze on in terms of royalties, tax payments, other limitations on their flexibility. Sort of walked back from the opening, but there are major foreign oil companies still operating in Venezuela, and their production is an important percentage of overall production in the country.
Assuming that he becomes this big winner in these elections, should this olive branch come perhaps, and therefore Chavez becomes strengthened, shouldn't this olive branch come from Washington instead of coming from Caracas, since you have on the one hand a strengthened Chavez, on the other hand a weakened Bush? The other question is, since PDVSA, the state oil company from Venezuela, has business in the U.S., do the U.S. fear that with a strengthened new term for Chavez, he might do a form of blackmail with his oil?
To answer the second question first, in terms of the oil relationship, again, were Venezuela to try to shift its markets and not sell to the United States, it would be a very, very costly and difficult process for them. It would be highly disruptive. It would result in a great hurt for Chavez, at least in the short term. And again, the structure of the energy relationship is the infrastructure in place for refining and distributing the heavy crudes from Venezuela in a traditional relationship that is one that is mutually beneficial. Chavez depends on that market, and it would be difficult for him to make those changes. Your first question was whether the United States should extend an olive branch again. I think that there is probably an openness to cooperation on issues that are of mutual concern. I think that there are probably on an everyday basis areas where the United States and Venezuela cooperate, and there could be more. But again, it's extremely difficult in an environment where the President of the United States, where the United States is denounced daily as the root of all evil, and the accusations of trying to basically subvert Venezuela are out there every day.
We have time for a couple more. Great. Well, thanks for coming today. Right over there.
In the last months, David Ramonet from Resumen Efectivo. From the last months, the opposition in Venezuela has been growing unexpectedly. It seems that of pressure on Baduel, General Baduel, who has said, unlike Chavez said just recently that the army is red and there is no there is no doubt that it supports the revolution. But then General Baduel said that the army is constitutional and things like that that have been permeated the debate during the last weeks. Do you see any problematic result in the next Sunday or Monday?
I don't think that there will be. I think the people are predicting that the election is a heated one, and it's a contest in which two sides are very much in confrontation. I'm not aware of predictions of violence or difficulty in that regard. I think it will. How things turn out will depend on the vote itself, how the two sides react to it, on what that vote really is going to look like. If there's a surprise factor built into this, well, it will be a surprise. We'll see. Again, the polls show the Chavez in a favorable position, but just how favorable that is again, the polls themselves are not clear on that. There may be factors that have not been taken into consideration. It's sort of going to be interesting to call. Chavez's vote in the past three times have been pretty constant. He got 56, I think, when he came in 98, 59 in 2000, and I think about 59 in the recall referendum. So it's been pretty consistent, and remains to be seen what things will be on Sunday. But I think the election will be carried out in an orderly fashion. And again, there'll be 200 observers there from different international organizations, and it'll be interesting to hear what they have to say about the proceedings.
Thank you all for coming today. Later this afternoon, we'll have a transcript posted on our website at www.csis.org. We'll also be mailing it out. And if you have any additional questions leading up to the election, please feel free to give us a call. Thanks very much.